Hello everyone, this is Bobbin Threadbare, and welcome back to the Crew 2.
I'm Great Joe, and that's an R34.
Yes, it is.
Oof. Oof.
So what do you think about the paint job I've selected for this one? I kind of like the sort of blueprint graffiti look it's got going on.
It's real busy, and I kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, it's appropriate for it to be busy, because as you might have guessed from its ability to hold onto a corner, we're going drifting today.
Oh, man. So is this a... Well, I guess we'll see. I'm kind of excited for this.
Oh? Well, you might be a little less excited when you hear that I suck at drifting. This is my worst event.
We'll see.
I mean, yeah, we will see me succeed at these events.
I'm so sorry. Oh, you poor thing. You're doing your best. I'm sure you are.
Yeah. Well, I will get a little bit better at this later on as I go for the harder events, but yeah. This is
Oh, man. Well,
this is sort of what it's always like for me.
oh, the Skylines are good cars for these, I think.
Yeah.
So it's just, so tell me about this. There's a zone I see marked out on the map there.
Well, that's basically the entire play area here between the walls.
Okay.
So the way this works is that the more sideways you are, the more points you get, and the longer you hold a drift, the higher that combo multiplier goes up, and that is the most important aspect of this game.
Okay.
But your combo ends as soon as you tap a wall or any obstruction whatsoever, like so, or if you stop drifting for long enough, and that can happen either because you keep driving straight or because you spin round too far, just like that.
So I'm comparing this to Race Driver Grid, which had a similar mode, but it did not let you bank points when you knocked into a wall, so I guess in that way it is a bit more forgiving.
Yeah, it does let you bank. But by the way, look at the top score there.
Oh,
Yeah, 800,000.
that's a good amount of hours spent.
Yeah, when I say that one of the other point games is low scoring, that's because I am judging it by drift racing.
Good news. Bushimara is staying in, and it's all thanks to you.
Oh yeah, this was a sponsored event, but provisionary sponsored. And so me being good at the sport meant that it got more legitimate. Yay. Oh, here's a unique one. It's got its own intro.
Oh man. Oh man.
Also, I do have more drift cars than this one. Not sure if I switch it now or later.
Okay.
Apparently not now.
What we got here today is a race for charity. Had to call in a lot of favors to make it happen, but it had to happen. A whole lot of people from the mayor on down don't trust us. Time to show everyone we're more than just outlaws. Get ourselves some good buzz for a change. Can't hurt, you know what I'm saying? Oh, and the race? It's gonna take over the whole harbor, including cargo ships. Careful you don't drift yourself right overboard, because that can hurt. You wanna make a splash? There's better ways to do it. Got faith in you.
So it's for charity. I'm guessing it's just for ambiguous charity reasons.
Well, like I said, drifting more so than the other disciplines plays into what's his face, the Fixer's idea of making street racing more legitimate. Because unlike other kinds of street racing, this basically has to happen on a closed circuit. Now it's this being a game. Haha. Yeah. Anyway, this being a game, these closed circuits can be very creative and unusual, such as what we're going through right now. But still.
Oh, man.
So, you know, I should say I do at least understand the strategy of drifting for this game. Like, you need to use brakes and nitro judiciously to make sure that you maintain the proper amount of speed so that you aren't bumping into walls and you aren't straightening out for too long.
Yeah.
But then actually pulling it off is a bit more trouble for me.
Oh. I'm still trying to get a handle on this. It definitely seems like getting your momentum up is kind of difficult.
That's just me, mostly. On the other hand, I will say that smaller drifts are better in this version of drifting, because so long as you can keep up the multiplier, you will get horrendous amounts of points. Also, you might notice contract keeps updating.
Oh.
That's because one of my outstanding contracts is be in blank number of drift races. Also, the upgrades don't like to spawn up on the ship for some reason.
What do we have here?
So these are my other two drifting cars. In fact, this here is my good one.
Oh.
So let's get a couple more of these in to spotlight the other drifting cars. Yeah, let's head to Detroit. And by the way, you might have noticed. So, yeah, European racing car, American drag racing car, Japanese drifting car. Like I said, I like to pick the right tool for the right job. Yeah, this one required a few different tries on my part. And once again, I have no one to blame for that but myself.
Well,
Although I am getting a good multiplier this time. Till that happens.
I'm wondering about all that brass on the circuit.
Well, it's basically this is taking place in a derelict abandoned factory. So all of that is or was pavement at one point,
Ah.
and that is grass and dirt reclaiming the pavement. I mean, we are in Detroit, remember?
Yeah, that we are. Just felt central.
Yeah, I mean, I believe I've had a look at the second level of these events, the second difficulty level.
Yeah?
And I believe the requirements there start getting to be around 200,000.
That seems differently attainable, to say the least.
Well, if you weren't me, it would be fairly easy to do. Relatively easy, I suppose. And also, the combo maxes out at 50.
You beat T.O.'s record. That is not gonna make him happy.
Okay.
But only ordinarily, because you can spend your icon points to increase the max multiplier. I haven't, because that's not useful for me.
Okay.
I have a hard enough time getting to 50 in the first place. But one thing I wanted to mention, though, is that you can see that the front tires have camber.
Yeah.
They tilt inwards, and not just to one side or the other.
Yeah, it's a common trick. One of the few times I actually went to like a motorsport event, I did notice they usually have different tires in the front and the back, like really fancy ones up front, and then just whatever you could get used in the back.
Yeah, because the front tires are supposed to have the good grip. And so my third car here is a Dodge Viper.
Of course.
Well, how do you mean, of course?
I mean, the Dodge Viper is more at home sideways than going forwards.
Well, in this case, it comes in handy.
Yeah.
And the last event here is taking place around Central Park in New York City.
Oh boy.
And this one can get particularly difficult because all of those bicycles, all of those trash cans, all of those park benches, all of those lampposts, touch any one of them and your combo ends.
Oh man.
Or any of the, stones. Or the lake. You also don't want to go in the lake or, run over the pedestrians.
They're fine. they're fine, see?
Not even just
We're
pedestrians.
still
Those are people watching this event.
up.
Rather impolite to run them over. I mean, unless they're so crowding the race that they're actively standing in the street and part like a wave in front of the people driving.
Oh, so you looked up the Portuguese Group B footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff's scary.
Crazy. Just the car POV shots of just a human wave receding in front of them, parting in front.
It's bizarre, to say the least.
I have no idea how I avoided falling in, or even losing my combo there.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I actually got a chance of beating this event, even though we're up to 50,000 points.
Oh man.
And like I said, this is just a normal event. That's how much I'm required to get in a normal event. Meanwhile, the people who actually know what they're doing got 782,000 points.
Remember, safety comes first at all events.
That it does, Mr. Announcer Man. That it does.
And I do want to point out that if I appear to be competent enough to win all of these races in a row, that is only because I cut out all of the failed attempts.
Mm-hmm.
Also, despite this not being my event, I am at 208 out of 230 performance level for drift cars.
Hmm.
Anyway, now it's time to do a little something different. And in this case, that means choosing a couple of drift events that have just dropped. Bonneville and Salt Flats. And just so you're aware, Bonneville Salt Flats is the name of the place. So both of these are out of the same area here.
Three, two, one.
Oh.
Yeah, we're actually out on the Salt Flats, driving a drift car, because that's what you do out here.
Yeah.
And there went the car I was supposed to beat. The objective.
Oh, you got him.
It's a pretty nice margin.
And you got 2 more runs, right?
Yeah. And hey, look, there are those supersonic cars.
Oh, yeah. Gotta love them.
And I believe those are just out here. Like if you roam around through the Salt Flats, north of Vegas, you will find a whole bunch of these RVs and mobile homes. And all this equipment from people testing out extremely fast vehicles. Oh yeah, there's another one.
I do wonder if that's like a DLC option. It's coming in the future.
To drive a supersonic car?
Yeah, why not?
Loading times. I think that's the reason why we won't get cars going much faster than 300 miles an hour in any event.
Oh, yeah.
Because the poor game has to load in assets as you run through them. Like, that's why all of the airplanes have throttled down from where they fly at. Oh hey, there's some stuff.
There's some stuff.
Alright, but that was the boring Salt Flats update race. So let me just put in the better parts here. Getting close to 400 now.
Okay.
Let's go to Bonneville.
That's another...
Another Salt Flats.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
What's gonna change there?
Well, we're going off in a different direction across the Salt Flats. That much has changed. And you might notice that the minimum time is different. And you can see all the stuff is over there now.
Ah.
All them supersonic cars. And hey, yeah, Bonneville Salt Flats International Speedway. I saw that sign there in the corner.
Okay.
Ah, here we go.
Oh. That's, that just happened.
Good old-fashioned stunt work.
How many cars was that?
I haven't bothered counting. Quite a few. Well, let's do it again. Give you a better look now that you know what's coming.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a highway just over there.
Yeah. I mean, that's why this place got so popular for drag racing, right? It was just off the highway.
Could be. But it's also popular among, testers.
Oh, yeah.
But I think because of its being popular among people who test high-speed vehicles, I think that reputation is the main reason why Bonneville in particular has started appearing on everybody's radar and in racing games. Because there are other, dead lakes in Nevada and Eastern California.
Oh, yeah. But they all do the same thing, right? It's just that one of them happens to have a whole lot of infrastructure around it.
Yeah. And if I can get control of my car here, I'd like to drive back towards the giant pile of cars here.
Oh,
They're a bunch of UPS trucks.
those are vans. Holy crap.
Yep, and they only appear for the event. They're not just out here waiting for you.
It's a real blink and you miss it moment.
Yeah. Glad I went back to check it out before the event officially ended.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, also got a whole bunch of new street races, so let's have a better look at the rest of the map now. Starting with the San Bernardino Mountains, which are the mountains that surround Los Angeles. Los Angeles is in a valley. The San Bernardino Mountains are why it's a valley.
Okay.
As always with these races, we've got a specific time and weather conditions to look at. In this case, what looks like twilight?
Overcast golden hour?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we just started in Los Angeles, and out we go into the mountains. Looks like it's freshly rained as well.
It's always nice.
Well, traction is not at its best under such conditions.
That just makes it more fun. I do remember there was a dev stream for Saints Row the Third where they just went into the real-time, like how the second game had a real-time day-night cycle and the third didn't. That's only because they wanted wet pavement. That's it. And it is a nice effect.
Right. Well, the sun is in the northwest, so this is definitely evening. I can tell that because I can see the sun when the compass says I'm pointed northwest.
Oh, and now we're in the sky, in the cloud line.
Or at the very least, we're getting up high enough, or into the woods enough, that it's starting to get misty. Like, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but, you know, when it's at just the right temperature for the dew point to hit, you always get more dew, more mist out in the woods and in the fields than you do in the cities. That's because the trees and the grasses are trapping a lot of moisture and emitting a lot of moisture as well, as opposed to all of the stone and dead wood in a city.
There's something new every day.
And oh hey, Looks like, speaking of woods, we're really hitting the woodsy area now. It's because we're traveling basically north up along the coastline here. So we're starting to see the big woods with all of the huge trees in central and northern California. Like the sequoia, the redwood, those are both Californian trees. Although you really see their biggest concentrations in the national parks just north of San Francisco. And in any case, it looks like we're heading out of the woods now and into the deserts beyond. But that's where it ends, because this is the San Bernardino Mountains Road. And in any case, since we did those two drag races, I only wanted to show one street race this time. And oh hey, it's still pretty, the normal weather.
That it is.
Well, I guess we weren't in Los Angeles. We were in a sort of a suburb area there. Oh well. For today's movie, we'll be taking a look at an all-time classic musical comedy. It's The Blues Brothers, a 1980 film requested by patron Final Gamer James. The story about the story. The Blues Brothers begins with a TV show, Saturday Night Live. You may have heard of it. SNL first premiered in 1975, back when live variety shows and TV sketch comedy were in their prime. And at the time, Saturday Night was just one more name on a big pile. However, SNL had the advantage of having some of the biggest future names in comedy working on its staff during the first few years. And thanks to that solid start, the show has been going strong to this day. It was so successful, in fact, that many of the long-running sketches got enough support to interest the movie studios. Some of these movies were poorly conceived to begin with, but others would go on to be some of the best comedy films ever made, and The Blues Brothers is definitely a film in that second category. The Blues Brothers started out as a way to combine both the comedy sketch and musical aspects of Saturday Night Live, not to mention an excuse to show off the vocal talents of two of the original cast members, Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. Respectively, they played Elwood and Jake Blues, and their debut was as the musical guests of an April 1978 episode of the show. Now it's worth mentioning that the Blues Brothers was a serious rhythm and blues band that would perform live in concerts and record albums. But at the same time, these were talented actors and comedians, and even before Belushi got involved, Aykroyd and his friend Ron Gwynn were working on the script that would eventually become the Blues Brothers film. The liner notes of their first album, Briefcase Full of Blues, contain a fictional biography of Jake and Elwood and how they became blood brothers after growing up together in a Catholic orphanage. This backstory features prominently in the film. John Belushi became a Hollywood star in 1978 thanks to his memorable role in National Lampoon's Animal House, and so he and Aykroyd had no trouble convincing Universal Studios to produce his pet film. They did have trouble creating a screenplay though, since Aykroyd had no experience writing them, but eventually the director John Landis, who also directed Animal House, was able to refine Aykroyd's rambling free verse into a shootable script. The Blues Brothers is full of R&B legends performing some of their most famous songs, and Dan Aykroyd in particular insisted on giving them speaking roles around these performances. Signing all of these famous names added a lot to the movie's budget, but luckily it wasn't as bad as it could have been, since 1980 was part of the age of disco and many of the singers hadn't had a hit in years. I won't bother naming them all now, but don't worry, I'll point them out as we go along. Unfortunately, the filming was troubled for a number of reasons. Belushi was deep into the drug addiction that would kill him in 1982, and so he had issues with getting to set on time and being sober enough to act. He wasn't the only one either. Cocaine was incredibly popular in backstage Hollywood at the time, and it's fair to say a big part of the movie's budget got snorted up the cast and crew's collective noses. Still, the movie was a big hit with audiences and critics, and despite getting a limited release, it made $115.2 million on a $30 million budget. It then made more money thanks to showing up just as home video was taking off, and it's maintained its popularity to this day. The iconic car that the Blues Brothers drive in the film, which they call the Bluesmobile, is a 1974 Dodge Monaco sedan. It's described in-story as being a retired police vehicle from Mount Prospect with a squad car performance package, and that was indeed an option for the real 1974 Monaco. They knew this because the production team purchased 13 Dodge Monacos from the California Highway Patrol to portray the car. They needed that many to perform all of the comedically unrealistic stunts in the film, and then they went and bought around 50 more old cop cars for the big chase scene at the end of the movie. Fun fact, the 1974 Monaco was the first model year of the car's third generation, and while the 440 V8 engine used in the movie was the biggest available for that year, it could only produce 220 horsepower. For reference, the 1970 Dodge Challenger featured in Vanishing Point could produce between 335 to 425 brake horsepower depending on the engine. But that's enough of the car stuff. Let's move on to the story. The movie begins at the Joliet Correctional Center. Joliet is an industrial suburb of Chicago, Illinois, and the rest of the film will take place in the Chicago area. We're here because Jake Blues is being released on parole for good behavior, and the man giving back his possessions is Frank Oz, the original voice of like half the Muppets, and Yoda from Star Wars. Outside the prison, Elwood Blues is waiting to pick up his blood brother in what is obviously a decommissioned cop car. And as they drive away, we get our first song, She Caught the Katy, sung by Belushi. Anyway, Jake is upset by the car since they used to have an old Cadillac, but Elwood traded it for a microphone. Elwood got the current ride from a Mount Prospect police auction, Mount Prospect being another Chicago suburb. Jake doesn't like the new Bluesmobile, so Elwood demonstrates its value by ramping over one of Chicago's famous drawbridges. The Blues Brothers' first stop after prison is the St. Helen of the Blessed Shroud Orphanage, the Catholic orphanage where they both grew up. Jake is reluctant to visit the Penguin, as they call her, but he made a promise, and so they go in. The visit is rather eerie and supernatural, but during it, they learn that the orphanage needs $5,000 for property taxes, or else the church will sell the building to the Board of Education. The Blues Brothers say they can get the money in no time, but the nun refuses to take their stolen cash. She then throws them out and tells them only to return once they redeem themselves. As the brothers collect themselves, Cab Calloway as Curtis greets them. Curtis is the orphanage's janitor, and he explains that the money has to be in the county assessor's office in 11 days. Back when Elwood and Jake were growing up, Curtis introduced them to rhythm and blues, and apparently they also copied his fashion sense. Curtis tells the two to visit the Triple Rock Baptist Church and listen to Reverend Cleophas, and despite some misgivings, they do so. Reverend Cleophas turns out to be played by James Brown, and we get our first proper musical number as he starts singing The Old Landmark, an old gospel song. Fun fact, James Brown's part in this song was recorded live, since he couldn't lip-sync. Meanwhile, Jake has a holy epiphany and realizes that he and Elwood can make the $5,000 if they get the band back together. That night, Elwood breaks it to Jake that the band broke up and drifted apart. Then a couple of state police officers pull them over for running a red light, and their computer tells them that Elwood has a suspended license and 56 moving violations. When they go to arrest him, we get our first car chase of the film, one that goes right through the Dixie Square Mall, which had closed the year before in Harvey, Illinois. After losing the cops, the Blues Brothers park their car in a rundown part of Chicago as Carrie Fisher looks on. Fun fact, Fisher was Aykroyd's girlfriend at the time. She pulls out a giant missile launcher and tries to kill Jake, but she misses, and the two brothers continue to Elwood's place without comment. The next morning, the state police, along with John Candy as Lieutenant Mercer, track Elwood down and prepare to bust into his room. But then Carrie blows up the building. And once again, Jake and Elwood climb out of the rubble, dust themselves off, and begin their day without comment. The Blues Brothers start tracking their old bandmates down, and they find most of them working as a new band called Murph and the Magic Tones. They drive to an outskirts Holiday Inn where they're playing, and it's worth pointing out that the band members are all very notable session musicians. That's the real band. The Blues Brothers explain that Jake went to jail for sticking up a gas station to try and pay the band off, but now they've got to forget about money because they're on a mission from God to save the orphanage. The guys agree to help, but there are still 3 band members missing. One is a maitre d' at a posh restaurant, and the other 2 work at a soul food restaurant with one of their wives. Jake and Elwood hit up the posh restaurant that evening. The maitre d' is unhappy to see them and wants them to leave, but instead they stay and do things like tuck their napkins into their collars, whistle for a waiter, and otherwise make themselves completely unbearable. And hey, that's Paul Rubens, a year before he created Pee Wee Herman. As the other patrons get fed up and leave, Jake promises to come back and do this again 3 times a day. So the maitre d' relents. The next day, there's a demonstration of neo-Nazis in a park and a whole lot of agitated protesters. It's clogging up the street, so Elwood drives around the traffic jam and forces the Nazis to jump into the river. This makes all the protesters happy, but the Nazis will remember this. On the way into the cafe, we get a performance from John Lee Hooker, performing Boom Boom. Once inside, the 2 order lunch from their band member's wife, played by Aretha Franklin. She doesn't want her husband to become a musician again. When they get into an argument about it, she starts singing Think. Fun fact about this performance, Franklin also had no idea how to lip sync, so this sequence had to be assembled from about 100 takes to get the parts where she did it right. However, the 2 musicians still go with the brothers. Now that the band is back together, the next step is to pick up some instruments. So they all head to Ray's Music Exchange and get some on credit from Ray Charles. And we get another music and dance number as he sings Shake a Tail Feather. They have the musicians and they have the instruments, but the Blues Brothers don't have a gig lined up. So they drive around for a few hours until Jake randomly picks a country bar called Bob's Country Bunker outside of Kokomo, Indiana. Luckily, they convince the staff that they're the Good Old Boys, the scheduled band. The rural crowd doesn't appreciate their usual blues music, but the band knows a couple of country-style songs, and so they play the theme from Rawhide and Stand By Your Man. Somehow they get through the night, but then they find out that the beer is not free and they drank more than their paycheck. And then the real Good Old Boys show up, led by Tucker McElroy. The Blues Brothers manage to get away, but Tucker and Bob, the bar owner, are pissed off once they realize what just happened. They chase after them, but then the Illinois State Police end up colliding with the Good Old Boys and arrest them. Jake and Elwood meet in a sauna with an old agent of theirs, Maury Sline. He has some reservations when they say how fast they need a gig, but he books them for the Palace Hotel Ballroom north of Chicago for the next evening. The Blues Brothers spread news of the show by stealing a public announcement speaker for their car, and Curtis has the kids from the orphanage hand out flyers. This gets the word out, but the Nazis, the Good Old Boys, and the state police also hear about it. Unfortunately, the Bluesmobile runs out of gas, so while the ballroom fills to capacity, the brothers are delayed. So Curtis, Cab Calloway remember, keeps the audience entertained by performing Minnie the Moocher. Fun fact, Calloway didn't want to perform this song in the movie because he had recently released a disco version of Minnie and wanted to promote that. Anyway, the song keeps the crowd busy long enough for the Blues Brothers to get past the police roadblocks and sabotage the Good Old Boys RV. And when John Candy gets to the ballroom, he decides to listen to the concert before arresting the brothers. So the Blues Brothers play their big concert, starting with Everybody Needs Somebody to Love, and followed by Sweet Home Chicago. Then, during an instrumental break, they dance backstage and meet a friendly record producer, who offers them a record deal and gives them a $10,000 cash advance on the spot. So they grab half for the orphanage, tell the producer to give the rest to the band and Ray's Music Exchange, and then sneak out of the building to get the money to the county assessor right when they open the next morning. Carrie Fisher catches up with them again in the storm drain and finally explains herself. She was Jake's fiancée, but he left her at the altar. So Jake begs for his life, makes up excuses, briefly seduces her, and then makes his getaway. However, the police, Nazis, and good old boys are not far behind. So begins the biggest car chase of the movie. The good old boys get knocked out of the chase early thanks to that sabotage, and then the state police all crash as they try to follow Elwood down a highway embankment. After that, the brothers reach the city limits, so the Chicago police take over the pursuit. The stunts and crashes get progressively more cartoonish as the chase goes on, especially after the Nazis join in. Jake and Elwood finally make it to downtown Chicago, and their car literally falls to pieces as soon as they park. The SWAT team, the National Guard, and the Chicago firefighters show up to lay siege to the building, but the Blues Brothers are able to get the money to the assessor's office in time. They even get the receipt. The movie ends with the Blues Brothers band playing Jailhouse Rock in prison, followed by all the musical guests adding their own lines. The cars. Today's discipline was drifting, and I haven't really talked about that yet. So hell, why not? First, and you may have noticed this already, but drifting and oversteer, they're the same thing. You make a sharp turn, the lateral G's overpower the grip of the rear tires, and the back end starts moving sideways. There's just one difference. Oversteer is an accident, but drifting is on purpose. So, why drift at all? Well, if you have a perfectly engineered car with immense amounts of downforce, you shouldn't. Your wheels will stick to the pavement even during a high-speed hairpin, so you should take advantage of that. But not everyone who races will do so in a car with great downforce. If you have more speed than you do grip, you should embrace that fact and let the back end slip away. If you can control your oversteer, if you can keep the front end pointed in the right direction even as the back tires spin, you will come out of the turn with a lot of speed and control. You will have lost some speed from letting the wheels spin, but with some cars on some tracks, you would lose more speed by braking hard enough to avoid oversteer. This is why you see drifting happen more often in street races or in mixed surface competitions. Oversteer is a fact of life in these races, and so, as a driver, you might as well learn how to use it to your advantage. Drifting as a technique began in Japan in the 1970s, hence why my go-to drifting car is a Nissan. The man considered the father of drifting, Kunimitsu Takahashi, started his career in the motorcycle Grand Prix, but shifted to four-wheel cars in 1961. So this is a guy who was used to leaning into a corner. He drove in touring car races throughout the 60s and 70s, and by the 70s he had developed a technique called the four-wheel drift. If you could angle things just right, you could let your traction go and end up pointed in the right direction while keeping the front wheels pointed straight and taking part in the slide. The touring cars of the time had stiff tires and low downforce, and so a four-wheel drift was an efficient way to take a corner, and the technique caught on throughout the Japanese racing scene. Then there was the other guy, the Drift King, Keiichi Tsuchiya. Tsuchiya learned how to race on the twisty mountain roads of Japan, the kind of roads where drifting really comes in handy, and so he used drifting when he started entering professional races in 1977. Tsuchiya would not go completely legitimate, at least not right away, and so thanks to his influence, drifting became popular throughout the professional and street racing communities of Japan. The first time people competed just to show off their drifting skills was in 1986. Like the first ever auto race, the event was sponsored by a media outlet, in this case, Carboy magazine. More events would follow in Japan, and drifting would start to show up in other countries in the mid-90s. The premier drifting competition in Japan is called the D1 Grand Prix. It got its start in the year 2000, as what began as one annual race became a series of competitions. And at this point, you have to win a qualifying competition to even enter the D1. Participants are judged on things like entry and exit angles, the line the car follows during the curve, how much control they maintain, how fast they get through, and how well they can showboat during the drift. You can measure that last one by looking at things like how much smoke they produce and just how close they can get to a wall without clipping it. Like any other kind of motorsport, once people started drifting as a competition, people started designing and modding cars to make them better at drifting. Rear-wheel drive is a big plus since they're easier to oversteer, but you can drift in a front-wheel drive car if you do it right. A limited slip rear differential can also help. Now, tires are tricky when it comes to drifting. You don't want them to have too much grip since that would inhibit drifting, but you still want some of that grip to be there for when you accelerate or recover from a drift. Your tires also have to take a lot of sideways pressure, so you'll want stronger sidewalls that can take that kind of abuse. This is why the rims stick out further than usual on drifting tires, to reinforce the sidewalls. As for why the front tires turn inward in the game, this is called camber, and it helps increase the front end's traction when the back end of the car is skidding sideways. There's more to discuss, like how the international drifting scene is taking off, but I've been talking long enough. So thanks for joining me again for today's movie and car review, and I hope I'll see you next time for an Italian buddy comedy about racing, the mafia, revenge, and dune buggies.